Hello, church. Today we are doing Revelation chapter 6, verses 1 through 8. We've moved from the letters and the throne room scenes and now to the opening of the seals of the scroll that Jesus received in chapter 5. Who will appreciate the message of the Horsemen? I think I did that question because it sounds like no one would. But actually, if we have a heavenly perspective, since orders are coming from the throne, from those cherub around those flying around the throne, the seraphim, if we have an eternal perspective, we are recognizing that God's justice is a very important part of his character. And therefore, it's good that God brings justice on the earth. Not only that, but it turns people's hearts away from what is temporary to what is eternal. So who should appreciate the four horsemen? We should all appreciate it. No one likes death or suffering or sorrow. It's hard. But at the same time, it causes us to turn our eyes from what is passing to what is eternal. It not only judges the wicked, but it purifies the saints. It helps us to get our heart in the right place. I think it's the end of 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 18, that talks about we look not at the things that are seen, but at the things that are unseen, because the things that are seen are temporal, but the things that are unseen are eternal. I kind of answered two already. Who orders come? It's that seraphim, and he's taking orders from the throne. We see a little later, I think it's seal 3 that talks about that. They're receiving orders from the throne. That means these things are not like out of control. They are God taking his hand of protection away. When he says to come, they are, excuse me, try to get this phone turned off. They are not, they're not doing something that let me say it this way. They're doing what they want to do, and God has held them back. But when God says come or go, it's because it's his time for justice and judgment and purification of the saints. Number 3, what's the parallel passage in the Gospels? Matthew chapter 24, or what we call the Olivet Discourse. It's also in Mark 13 and in Luke as well, but especially verses 5 through 14 really parallel closely to this passage. Number 4, what indicates the horses are presently active? You know, some people would say, well, these seals are in the tribulation. These are the first half of the tribulation. Is a popular interpretation. It could be, but remember, seals keep the scroll closed, and all 7 have to be opened before the scroll is opened. So if we look at what these 4 are doing, it's something we see happening in the world all around us. Ever since the Cain and Abel, there's war, there's famine, there are pestilences and death. It's a given in human life. And yet it seems that after Jesus ascends and is worthy to take those seals and open them, we have seen war, especially in the 20th century, like we've never seen before. 75 million people died in World War II. Over 20 million died in World War I. And many of those, the majority, were civilians. And of course, in World War II, there were the millions of Jews that were exterminated in the concentration camps. And it's going on today. And I mentioned in the sermon, who knows what's going to happen with Iran and Israel. They're rattling their sabers at each other. Took out the embassy in Syria. Any day now, you know, people live with kind of on edge right now, like we did in the 60s. In the 60s, we used to live on the edge of, you know, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and is Russia going to start launching missiles nuclear missiles at the U.S., and we did the duck and cover under our desks at school, and but we're back there again, where anything could take off at any moment with the Ukraine-Russia war. So these horses are definitely active now, and yet Matthew 24 talks about wars and rumors of wars, but the end is not yet. You see, the scroll isn't actually opened yet. It is not actually the end. So this is before the end. It's the beginning of birth pangs. It is not the birth itself. Number 5, who rides the white horse? 2 opinions out there, 2 different interpretations. One is Jesus. This is the gospel going forth to conquer the world. The other is the Antichrist. The imagery is of a Parthian warrior with the crown on his head and the bow. That's a typical picture of the Parthian warrior. Why the Parthian warrior? Because the Parthians defeated Babylon. And in this book of Revelation, Babylon is the world system that's going to be defeated by God. So is this Jesus going forth to defeat Babylon, or is it the counterfeit, the Antichrist? If we parallel it to Matthew 24, Matthew 24 talks about false Christs, false messiahs, false prophets. So that would seem to fit the parallel better. But either one could be true. We also see later in the book that the 4s are of like kind, which would tend to make us think that was the same in this passage as well. Number 6, what should the church take from his activity? If it is the Antichrist, then he is allowed to test, to send out false prophets, but we should be encouraged that we are in a spiritual battle. What we're facing is not unusual. There's a spiritual battle going on, and so temptations and trials and this is especially on the spiritual side. Next, we're going to hit the physical side. But Matthew 24:13 says, "He who endures to the end will be saved." So what we need to take from it is to endure the spiritual battles, and come out on the right side. Number 7, what's the role of the second horse? This is physical war. This is clear. There's no question about this interpretation. He goes out to slay. The word is better translated slaughter. And we talked about how war has really increased, especially in the 20th century. What's the role of the third horse? Scarcity of food, famine. A lot of the dead in World War I and World War II was a result of famine, because men weren't able to farm their fields, or fields were wiped out, or fertilizer was unavailable, and so forth. And so there was a shortage of food. And that's what this indicates as well. Scarcity of food that causes malnutrition, which causes death. And remember, John 10:10 tells us, the thief comes to kill, steal, and destroy. Satan comes to kill, steal, and destroy. How does the fourth horse sum up the previous 3? Well, the result of all of them is death. It mentions beasts, to kill with the beasts of the earth. Now, if we look at Daniel, I believe it's Daniel chapter 7, Daniel talks about kingdoms as beasts. He refers to a lion, a bear, and a leopard, and later on we find out those are different kingdoms of the earth. And so when in apocalyptic literature, when we read about beasts, it's not that suddenly there are going to be a lot of more bears and lions and tigers killing people. It's probably referring to these kingdoms and the wars that they cause, or the persecution that they cause. So last of all, how do these horses shape our attitude towards this life? We tend to think that everything's out of control, and it couldn't get any worse. And why does God allow all these things? Well, if we look at it from this perspective, that these are released at the order from the throne, that means that God allows these things to judge the wicked and to purify his people. Once we come to Christ, we're in that process of sanctification, and hardship is often that path that takes us to sanctification, whether it's emotional or spiritual or physical. God lets us go through things so that we mature, so that we are prepared to enter into eternity, so that we lay up treasures in heaven, so that we learn the fruits of the Spirit. He's about purifying his people because he's more concerned about our eternal good than our temporary happiness. We may not understand his hand, but we always know his heart. We just have to look at the cross. So again, this life is temporary. Eternity is a long time. Don't expect heaven on earth. That's what the four horsemen are telling us. When you say, well, when we tend to think, well, why has everything gotten so rough? Hey, that's life in the fallen world. And it's life with these four horsemen raging in the world. What do we learn from it? How do we grow from it? How do we trust God more in it? That's the message I think we're to take from these four horsemen. So next we'll go through seal 5 and 6. A whole different twist now. We're going to go away from the four horsemen to a different perspective that we'll see next week. So thanks for listening.